Last night, Jimmy Kimmel Live erupted into chaos as White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt clashed with host Jimmy Kimmel in a fiery showdown, accusing him of disrespecting the American people with his relentless attacks on President Trump. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button for more explosive stories like this. The stage was set for a tense evening. Jimmy Kimmel, known for his sharp wit and unapologetic jabs at political figures, had spent weeks hammering President Trump on his show. His latest bit, a scathing monologue mocking Trump's marriage to Melania, calling it a hostage situation, had drawn laughs from the audience but fury from conservative circles. Enter Karoline Leavitt, the 27-year-old press secretary, a rising star in the Republican Party with a reputation for her fierce loyalty to Trump and her media savvy. She wasn't there to play nice. The crowd buzzed with anticipation as she took her seat, her poised demeanor barely masking the storm brewing beneath. Kimmel kicked things off with his usual charm, flashing a grin as he welcomed Leavitt. "Karoline, you're the youngest press secretary in history, which is impressive," he said, leaning forward. "But working for Trump, do you ever feel like you're babysitting a toddler with a Twitter account?" The audience roared with laughter, but Leavitt's smile tightened. She tilted her head, her eyes locking onto Kimmel's with a steely glint. "Jimmy, I'm here to represent the American people, not to be your punchline," she shot back, her voice calm but cutting. The crowd hushed, sensing the shift. Kimmel raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard, but he pressed on. "Oh, come on, Karoline, it's just a joke. You can't take everything so seriously." Leavitt didn't blink. "It's not just a joke when you mock the leader of the free world night after night, Jimmy. You're not just attacking Trump, you're disrespecting the millions who voted for him." The audience murmured, some clapping, others shifting uncomfortably. Kimmel leaned back, his smirk fading. "So what? I'm supposed to just nod along while he tweets about Big Macs and bleach?" he quipped, trying to regain control. But Leavitt was ready. "You're supposed to show some respect for the office, for the people who believe in him. Or is that too hard when you're chasing cheap laughs?" Her words landed like a slap, and the room crackled with tension. The exchange was only the beginning. Kimmel, visibly rattled, tried to pivot to policy, asking about Trump's latest economic plans. Leavitt seized the moment, laying out a defense of Trump's record with precision, citing job growth and tax cuts. But Kimmel wasn't interested in numbers. He cut her off, bringing up Trump's personal life again. "Let's talk about Melania. You really think she's happy playing First Lady in that circus?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. The crowd laughed, but Leavitt's face hardened. "You know, Jimmy, I came here to talk about the issues, but you can't help yourself. Can you? You're obsessed with tearing people down." The confrontation was spiraling, and the audience was eating it up. Leavitt leaned forward, her voice rising with controlled fury. "You sit here in your Hollywood bubble, mocking a man who's fighting for everyday Americans. You don't get it, do you? People are tired of your elitist nonsense." Kimmel's jaw tightened, his usual cool slipping. "Elitist? I'm just calling it like I see it," he snapped. But Leavitt wasn't backing down. "Then maybe you need to open your eyes, Jimmy. The American people see through your act." As the segment neared its end, the tension was palpable. Kimmel tried to wrap things up with a joke, but Leavitt wasn't done. "You can laugh all you want, but this country is bigger than your studio audience," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others booing. Kimmel's smile was gone, replaced by a thin-lipped grimace. He leaned in, his voice low. "You're preaching to the wrong choir, Karoline." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Maybe you're the one who needs to listen." The camera panned to the audience, their reactions a mix of shock and excitement. Leavitt had come to fight, and she was just getting started. But Kimmel, his ego bruised, was plotting his next move. The night was far from over, and the real fireworks were yet to come. Leavitt sat upright, her gaze unwavering, while Kimmel, his composure fraying, adjusted his tie and forced a chuckle. "All right, Karoline," he said, his voice laced with a challenge. "Let's keep this civil. You're here to defend Trump. So tell me, what's the best thing he's done lately?" The question was a trap, designed to steer the conversation back to his turf, but Leavitt wasn't biting. She leaned forward, her voice steady but sharp. "Jimmy, you don't want to talk policy. You want sound bites for your highlight reel. But fine, let's play. President Trump's trade policies have brought jobs back to places like Ohio and Pennsylvania, places you probably haven't visited in years." The audience stirred, some nodding, others scoffing. Kimmel smirked, sensing an opening. "Ohio? You mean the state he promised to save while factories kept closing? Come on, Karoline, you're smarter than that." His tone was patronizing, and the crowd laughed, but Leavitt's eyes flashed with defiance. "Smarter than falling for your gotcha games, Jimmy," she fired back. "Those factories are reopening because of tariffs that protect American workers. But you wouldn't know that, would you? You're too busy writing jokes about Trump's hair." The audience gasped, then erupted, split between cheers and jeers. Kimmel's face tightened, his fingers drumming on the desk. "You're really swinging tonight," he said, his smile thin. "But let's be real. Your boss isn't exactly a policy wonk. He's more about, what, golf and grudges?" The jab was meant to sting, but Leavitt was ready. "Grudges?" she said, her voice rising. "You're the one who's been grudge-joking about Trump for years, Jimmy. You're not informing anyone. You're just pandering to a room full of people who already agree with you." The crowd roared, the divide palpable. A woman in the front row clapped furiously while a man nearby shook his head. Kimmel leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "Pandering? That's rich coming from someone who spins lies for a living," he shot back, his voice dripping with venom. The accusation hung in the air, and for a moment, the studio felt like it was holding its breath. Leavitt's jaw clenched, but she didn't flinch. "Lies? I deal in facts, Jimmy. Like the fact that wages are up for the first time in decades, or that we've got peace deals in the Middle East that no one thought possible. What's your fact? That you get paid to mock people?" The audience exploded, the noise a chaotic blend of support and outrage. Kimmel's face reddened, his cool unraveling. "You're good at this, I'll give you that," he said, his voice tight. "But you're dodging the real question. How do you sleep at night defending a guy who's all about himself?" The question was a low blow, and Leavitt's eyes blazed. "I sleep fine, Jimmy, because I'm fighting for people who've been ignored by folks like you. People who want a country that works for them, not for your celebrity friends." The crowd was on its feet now, some chanting her name, others booing. Kimmel tried to cut in, but Leavitt pressed on. "You think you're the voice of America? You're not. You're the voice of a bubble that's about to burst." Her words were a dagger, and Kimmel's smirk vanished. He leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "You're out of your depth, Karoline. You're not changing minds here. You're just preaching to your MAGA choir." The insult was meant to dismiss her, but Leavitt turned it back on him. "Out of my depth? I'm 27, and I'm sitting here schooling you on your own show. Maybe you're the one who's out of touch." The audience roared, the energy electric. Kimmel's hands clenched, his eyes darting to the producer's booth. He was losing control, and he knew it. As the segment hurtled toward its close, the confrontation showed no signs of cooling. Leavitt had drawn blood, but Kimmel wasn't done. "You're bold, I'll give you that," he said, his voice icy. "But you're not running this show." Leavitt smiled, unfazed. "Maybe not, Jimmy, but I'm running circles around you." The crowd went wild, and Kimmel's face was a mask of barely contained fury. The studio lights burned hot, amplifying the electric standoff between Karoline Leavitt and Jimmy Kimmel. The audience, a volatile mix of cheers and jeers, hung on every word as Leavitt's defiant smile met Kimmel's seething glare. His icy retort, "You're not running this show," still echoed, but her comeback had landed harder, and the crowd's roar was proof. Kimmel's knuckles whitened as he gripped his desk, his usual charm replaced by a raw edge. "All right, Karoline," he said, his voice a forced calm. "You're here throwing punches, but let's talk about your boss's track record. 4 years, and we're still arguing about walls and tweets. You call that leadership?" The audience laughed, but it was nervous, sensing the powder keg about to ignite. Leavitt's eyes narrowed, her composure a steel trap. "Leadership, Jimmy? It's getting results, not chasing applause from a studio audience. Trump's border policies cut illegal crossings by half. His tax cuts put money back in workers' pockets. What's your contribution? Another snarky monologue?" The crowd split, half erupting in support, half groaning. A man in the back shouted, "Tell him, Karoline," while others hissed. Kimmel leaned forward, his smirk returning but brittle. "Results? You mean chaos? Your guys' rallies look like auditions for a reality show, not leadership. You're selling a fantasy." The jab was sharp, but Leavitt was sharper. "Fantasy? The American people aren't buying your Hollywood script anymore, Jimmy. They see a president who fights for them, not a comedian who mocks their struggles." Her voice was a blade, cutting through the noise. The audience roared, the divide stark. Kimmel's face twitched, his patience unraveling. "Fights for them? He fights for his ego," he snapped. "You're out here polishing his brand, but you can't polish a mess." The crowd laughed, but Leavitt didn't flinch. "A mess? The only mess here is your show, Jimmy. You're so obsessed with Trump, you forgot how to talk about anything else." The room was a pressure cooker, every exchange escalating the stakes. Kimmel tried to pivot, tossing out a lighter jab. "Come on, Karoline, you're young, you're sharp. Why tie yourself to a sinking ship? Trump's yesterday's news." The audience chuckled, but Leavitt's smile was ice cold. "Sinking ship? He's got more fight in him than your entire writer's room. And I'm not here for a career move, Jimmy. I'm here for the people who've been ignored by elites like you." The word elites hit like a grenade, and the crowd exploded, some standing, others shouting. Kimmel's eyes flashed with anger, his voice rising. "Elites? I'm just a guy with a microphone. You're the one working for a billionaire who plays golf while the country burns." Leavitt's face hardened, her voice steady but fierce. "You're not just a guy, Jimmy. You're a gatekeeper for a system that's been laughing at working class Americans for decades. Trump's fighting that system, and you're terrified because he's winning." The audience was a cacophony, cheers clashing with boos. Kimmel slammed his hand on the desk, his cool shattered. "Winning? He's losing the room, Karoline, and so are you." The accusation was desperate, and Leavitt seized it. "Losing the room? Look around, Jimmy. Half this crowd's with me, and millions more are watching at home. You're the one losing." The confrontation was a wildfire, consuming every ounce of civility. Kimmel tried to regain control, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're a star, Karoline, really. But this is my show, and I say when we're done." Leavitt leaned in, her voice low and lethal. "Your show? Maybe. But this moment, it's mine." The crowd went berserk, the noise deafening. Kimmel's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the clock. He was cornered, and he knew it. "We'll see about that," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Leavitt sat back, her gaze unyielding, daring him to push further. The segment was seconds from imploding, and the real clash was still brewing. The studio was a cauldron of chaos, the air thick with the raw energy of Karoline Leavitt's defiance and Jimmy Kimmel's barely contained rage. Her claim, "Your show? Maybe. But this moment? It's mine," had set the audience ablaze, their cheers and boos colliding in a deafening roar. Kimmel's muttered, "We'll see about that," was drowned out, his eyes flicking to the clock, as if time could save him. Leavitt sat back, her posture regal, her stare a challenge that pinned him to his chair. The segment was teetering on the edge, and the crowd sensed blood in the water. Kimmel forced a grin, his voice straining to reclaim authority. "Okay, Karoline, you're stealing the spotlight, but let's get serious. Your boss's latest stunt, calling the press the enemy of the people. You really stand by that?" The question was a grenade, lobbed to put her on the defensive. The audience leaned in, hungry for her response. Leavitt's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. "Jimmy, I stand by a president who calls out, a media that twists truth to fit its agenda. You're not the enemy, but you're not exactly a beacon of honesty either." The crowd erupted, split down the middle, some chanting her name, others shouting in protest. Kimmel's eyes widened, his facade cracking. "Honesty? You're out here spinning for a guy who lies about crowd sizes," he shot back, his voice sharp with mockery. "You're not fooling anyone, Karoline." The audience laughed, but Leavitt was unfazed, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Fooling anyone? I'm not the one playing to a laugh track, Jimmy. You cherry-pick stories to dunk on Trump, but you ignore the Americans who see him as their voice." Her words were a rallying cry, and half the crowd surged to their feet, clapping wildly. Kimmel's jaw tightened, his fingers tapping the desk in agitation. "You're good at this, I'll admit," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But you're dodging. Do you or don't you agree with Trump's attacks on the press?" He leaned forward, his eyes boring into her, daring her to slip. Leavitt met his gaze, unflinching. "I agree that the press, people like you, have lost the trust of millions. You don't report, you perform. And I'm here to call it out." The audience was a storm, cheers clashing with boos. A woman in the front row yelled, "You tell him," while another shook her head in disgust. Kimmel's face flushed, his voice rising. "Perform? This is my job, Karoline. What's yours? Covering for a con man?" The insult was a match to gasoline. Leavitt's eyes blazed, but her voice stayed lethal and controlled. "My job is speaking for a president who's rebuilding a country you've spent years tearing down. You call him a con man? The only con here is you pretending to care about the people." The crowd was a frenzy, the noise shaking the studio. Kimmel slammed his hand on the desk, his cool shattered. "You don't get to lecture me about the people," he snapped. "I'm out here every night while you're polishing Trump's ego in the White House." Leavitt leaned in, her voice a low, searing burn. "Every night? You're out here mocking the people who voted for him, Jimmy. You're not their champion. You're their critic." The audience was on its feet, the divide a chasm. Kimmel's eyes darted to the producer's booth, his control slipping further. "You're preaching, Karoline. But this isn't a rally," he said, his voice tight. "This is my stage." Leavitt's smile was razor-sharp. "Your stage? Then why am I the one holding the mic?" The crowd roared, the energy a living thing. Kimmel's face was a mask of fury, his hands clenched. As the segment careened toward its end, the clash was a full-blown inferno. Kimmel tried to pivot, tossing out a jab about Trump's legal battles. "Your guy's drowning in lawsuits. You still think he's the future?" Leavitt didn't miss a beat. "The future's with the people, Jimmy, not your tired talking points. And they're done with you." The audience was a tidal wave, and Kimmel's eyes burned with a mix of shock and anger. "You're pushing it, Karoline," he growled, his voice low. Leavitt sat back, her gaze unwavering. "Good. Maybe you'll finally feel something." The studio was seconds from erupting, and the final showdown was looming. The studio was a pressure cooker, the air vibrating with the raw intensity of Karoline, Leavitt's unyielding assault, and Jimmy Kimmel's mounting fury. Her stinging rebuke. "The future's with the people, Jimmy, not your tired talking points. And they're done with you," had whipped the audience into a frenzy, their cheers and boos a chaotic symphony. Kimmel's growled warning. "You're pushing it, Karoline," hung heavy, but Leavitt's cool defiance. Good. Maybe you'll finally feel something. Struck like lightning. The crowd was a roiling sea, and Kimmel's eyes blazed, his control hanging by a thread. The final showdown was no longer looming. It was here. Kimmel leaned forward, his voice a low, venomous hiss. You think you're some kind of hero, Karoline? You're just a mouthpiece for a man who'd sell out his own supporters for a headline. The audience gasped, the jab vicious and personal. Leavitt's face tightened, but her voice was steady, slicing through the tension. A mouthpiece? I'm the voice of millions who are sick of your smug lectures, Jimmy. You don't speak for them. You sneer at them. The crowd erupted, half on their feet, some shouting her name, others jeering. A man in the third row pumped his fist while a woman nearby clutched her purse, glaring. Kimmel's smirk was gone, replaced by a scowl. Sneer? I'm calling out a guy who's all talk and no substance, he snapped. You're out here defending a circus, Karoline. You're better than this. The condescension dripped, but Leavitt was a wall of steel. Better than this? I'm exactly where I belong, Jimmy, fighting for people you've written off as, deplorables. The word deplorables was a spark, igniting the audience into a deafening roar. Kimmel's face reddened, his hands slamming the desk. Don't twist my words. I've never said that, he barked, but Leavitt was relentless. You don't have to say it, Jimmy. Your jokes say it every night. The room was a battlefield, every word a grenade. Kimmel tried to pivot, his voice sharp with sarcasm. So what's the plan, Karoline? Trump's gonna save America by tweeting from Mar-a-Lago? You're betting on a loser. The audience laughed, but it was uneasy, sensing the tide turning. Leavitt leaned in, her eyes locked on his. A loser? He's got more fight in one tweet than you've got in your whole career. And I'm betting on the people who believe in him, not your applause meter. The crowd was a storm, cheers clashing with boos. Kimmel's jaw clenched, his voice rising. You're delusional if you think he's their savior. You're just his cheerleader. Leavitt's smile was a blade. Cheerleader? I'm a warrior, Jimmy, for a cause bigger than your ego. You're the one cheering for a system that's failing everyday Americans. The audience was electric, the noise shaking the studio. Kimmel's eyes darted to the producer's booth, his patience gone. You're out of line, Karoline, he snapped. This isn't your soapbox. She didn't blink. Out of line? I'm in the fight, Jimmy. You're just throwing punches from a cushy chair. The crowd was on its feet, the energy a living thing. A woman in the front row screamed, Go! Karoline! While others booed. Kimmel's face was a mask of rage, his voice a low growl. You think you're winning? You're just making noise. Leavitt's gaze was unyielding. Noise! I'm making history, Jimmy, and you're scared because you can't stop it. The audience was a tidal wave, the studio trembling. Kimmel tried one last jab, his voice dripping with disdain. History? You're a footnote in Trump's mess. Karoline, good luck with that. The insult was meant to crush, but Leavitt turned it back. A footnote? I'm writing the story, Jimmy, and it's one you'll never understand. The segment was seconds from collapse, the tension of physical force. Kimmel's eyes burned, his hands trembling. You're done here, Karoline, he said, his voice ice-cold. Leavitt stood, her posture defiant. Not done, Jimmy. Just getting started. The crowd roared, and the stage was set for an explosive exit. The final moment was coming, and it would shake the studio to its core. The studio was a volcano on the brink of eruption, the air thick with the searing heat of Karoline Leavitt's defiance and Jimmy Kimmel's barely restrained fury. His cold declaration, "You're done here, Karoline," met her fiery retort. "Not done, Jimmy. Just getting started." And the audience detonated, their roars shaking the rafters. Leavitt stood tall, her stance a challenge, her eyes locked on Kimmel's trembling form. The crowd was a churning sea, half chanting her name, half booing, as the final moments of the showdown unfolded. Kimmel's hands shook, his face a storm of anger and disbelief. The stage was set for an exit that would echo far beyond the studio walls. Kimmel leaned forward, his voice a venomous snarl. "You've had your moment, Karoline, but this is my show, and you're not welcome back." The audience gasped, the ultimatum a slap. Leavitt's smile was razor-sharp, her voice steady and lethal. "Your show? You've been coasting on cheap shots for years, Jimmy. I don't need your stage to speak for the people." The crowd erupted, cheers clashing with jeers. A man in the front row shouted, "She owned you!" while others hissed in dissent. Kimmel's eyes blazed, his voice rising. "Speak for the people? You're just Trump's parrot, squawking his lies." The insult was a desperate swing, but Leavitt was a fortress. "Parrot? I'm a voice, Jimmy, for millions you've mocked and ignored. You're the one parroting Hollywood's tired script." The audience was a whirlwind, the noise deafening. Kimmel slammed his fist on the desk, his composure shattered. "You're out of here, Karoline. Get off my stage." The command was raw, but Leavitt didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her voice a low, searing burn. "You don't get to dismiss me, Jimmy. The American people decide who speaks for them, not you." The crowd was on its feet, the studio trembling with their fervor. Kimmel's face was crimson, his voice a growl. "You're nothing without Trump's name behind you. Nothing." The audience held its breath, the tension a living thing. Leavitt's eyes flashed, her words a final dagger. "Nothing? I'm the future, Jimmy, and you're stuck in the past. Keep laughing. We're done listening." The crowd exploded, the sound a tidal wave. Kimmel's hands trembled, his eyes darting to the producer's booth, but there was no saving him now. Leavitt turned, her head high, and began to walk off the stage, each step a declaration of victory. The audience was a riot, some chanting "Karoline," others booing, but her presence commanded the room. Kimmel tried to regain control, his voice cracking. "Good riddance. Don't come back." But Leavitt paused at the edge of the stage, turning to face him one last time. "I don't need to, Jimmy. The people heard me, and they're coming for your bubble." The crowd roared, the words a battle cry. She raised a hand, not in farewell but in triumph, and strode off into the wings, leaving the stage in chaos. Kimmel sat frozen, his face a mask of shock and rage, as the audience's noise swallowed the studio. The cameras panned to the crowd, their faces alight with passion, some clapping furiously, others stunned into silence. The segment cut to black, but the impact lingered, a seismic shift in the air. Leavitt's exit was no defeat. It was a coronation. She had faced the lion in his den and walked away unbroken, her voice ringing in the ears of millions. Kimmel's stage was his, but the moment and the future belonged to her. As the dust settled, the studio crew scrambled to reset, but the energy refused to fade. Leavitt's words had struck a chord, a rallying cry for those who felt unseen. Outside, the world was already reacting, social media ablaze with her name, her defiance a spark that would not be extinguished. Kimmel's jab had been his last, and it had missed. Leavitt's triumph was complete, a blazing signal that the old guard was faltering and a new voice had risen to challenge it. The confrontation was over, and Karoline Leavitt had won.